And now, just in time, arrival, Anissa Zero is the Deputy Public Defender at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. And before joining that office in 2017, she worked at the Contra Costa Public Defender's Office in Richmond. She's a graduate of Howard University and Golden Gate School of Law, and she's, of course, living with these issues on a daily basis. So I'm going to start the discussion off with some questions. I didn't introduce myself. Most of you know I'm Deborah Rhode, the director of the Center on the Legal Profession, which is sponsoring this event. And Lara, I think it makes sense to start with you, since you wrote the piece in the Atlantic called "What It Takes to Be a Trial Lawyer If You're Not a Man," which led to this event. So maybe you could say a few words about what led you to write that piece, and what did you learn in researching it and fielding reactions?
Sure. So first of all, I want to start by saying thank you, Professor Rhode. It is such a pleasure to be here, and what an awesome turnout. I'm really thrilled that so many people are interested in this topic, and it's just fantastic that we can all be here together. So why did I write it? I wrote it because I kind of come to this point in my own professional life where I was almost 20 years out from when I first started practicing, when I was a federal public defender. And the year that I started, actually, Professor Rhode's study about women in the law was published by the ABA, talking about what she called famously the double standard and the double bind that women face in the courtroom. And I was really curious to know, now that I was in a position to be training people like all of you to be lawyers, and that's part of my job at USF, whether it was different and what was different. I hadn't been litigating on a regular basis in a few years, and so getting back into state court and seeing the dynamics was eye-opening for me, in the respect that a lot of things that I had experienced as a lawyer in my late 20s had not really changed, and I saw my students also experiencing them. So then I thought, well, I'll just cast as wide a net as I can and see if I could speak to women across practice areas, across geography, across race, across practice areas, and just see what their experiences were and tell those stories. And so that's really what I set out to do, and I'm especially happy because one of the best stories didn't make it into the piece, but it's here today in the form of Anissa and her story, which I'm really hoping that we can get to. And I guess I'll just end by saying one of the things that I found most striking and also most hopeful is that, first of all, there's some very strong women who break molds, and we have Lynn Humley here to talk about how she is one of those people. But then also we have this upcoming generation of lawyers like Anissa who are pushing back pretty hard against a lot of gender stereotypes and racial stereotypes and gender bias. And I think they're great role models too. And so it gives me a lot of hope for things really shifting more in a positive direction in the future.
Great. So Lynn, you were interviewed in that piece. You're one of the nation's most prominent female litigators.
It's shocking to hear you say it.
Well, and you got a lot of press in the Ellen Powell case. So can you talk a little bit about how you think the treatment of women lawyers by judges, opponents, and their clients has changed or not changed in the years you've been practicing?
You know, I haven't seen, I agree with Laura on this. We don't agree on a lot of the issues here, but I definitely agree that I have not seen a lot of change. But I didn't have a lot of problems at the start. So sometimes I wonder if I'm just so insensitive that I've been very badly treated and I just ignored it because I didn't really notice it because I'm so self-absorbed or otherwise not cognizant of what's happening. But I would say judges are still mean and cranky. Juries are still skeptical and curious and overly observant. Opponents are still a pain in the butt. But maybe the biggest change I see is because I have a fairly long-term set of chops from trial wins that get publicized. I don't get as much guff as I used to. I don't get as much condescension from judges and opponents. But I'm one of the few people who will say that my gender has not impacted my my professional success. It hasn't impacted how trials have worked for me, how clients have come to me, and as I think I've told Laura, at least I hope I did, I really believe that I have advantages that men do not have in the courtroom. That I get away with stuff they never would get away with. That I can be tough in cross-examination in a way which would cause them to be viewed as bullies and overly aggressive. And that for me, it's been a huge plus to be a woman traveler. It's just been in every way positive. And at OREC, where I've been now for 31 years, I wouldn't dream of leaving because I think I've been treated extraordinarily well. So I know I sound like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty, one of those people with their heads in the sand, and there maybe is some truth to that, but that's been my experience.
So, Anissa, Lara has suggested that female litigators in your generation are more willing to push back when confronted with apparent gender bias than in the past, and I gather you and your peers have done that to some extent, and Lara mentioned this teaser story, so I'm now going to set you up for it, so tell us.
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So yes, I think that our generation is pushing back a lot more than I actually anticipated going into the profession. Me and my female colleagues call it giving notice. So you have notice now, you know, that I'm watching and that I will challenge you. And I think that that actually helps. And my first trial, I was extremely terrified, and I did not challenge it, and I regret that, but that, you know, never again. I definitely felt the condescending tone from the judge, the looks that he would give if I'm fumbling with something, or would kind of give me suggestions on how to do my job. And this is, you know, in front of a jury, and it's terrible to feel belittled, and I never challenged it, but I think that if it ever happened again in front of that particular judge, it would not go so well. The incident that Lara mentioned is actually before, I think about a week or so before that happened, Jeff Adachi, who was the public defender, he had a meeting with just the newer attorneys and just gave us ideas and tips on how to make sure you pay attention to the record, And so going into the courtroom one day, my client was running late, and we were on the trial calendar, right? So our goal was just to go in and say, we're ready for trial. But he was running late, and the judge just issues a bench warrant. So there's a warrant out for this guy. He's like late in his late 50s, just has, you know, physical condition that makes it really difficult for him to move around. So found him, run to the courtroom with my client, like, give us our trial dates back and do away with this warrant. So I come in, and, you know, I make the request to recall the bench warrant and do away with it, so it's not in the system. We did that. Then I asked, next time, can you not order him present? He does not need to come to court just to say, I'm ready for trial. In fact, that's what my job is. And that just set the judge off. And he started asking me how long I've been practicing, do I have my bar card, what's your bar number? And, you know, this was a few months after passing the bar, so I have not been in the game that long, so it was very terrifying. But I remembered, think about the record. So I just started basically cross-examining the judge, like, on why he thinks that that's necessary to grant my request. And he started saying things like, you're being contemptuous, and then you see the deputy putting on gloves, and I'm like, oh my God, am I really gonna go to jail for this? It was just to scare me and see what I was going to do, because I did not go to jail, none of that happened. And the judge gave me what I wanted. So it was kind of like, what are you gonna do? So I sat there, I made the record, and this particular judge that kind of been doing something very similar to other female attorneys. And so that's when we started calling it notice, because we filed a judicial complaint against him. And I believe that it's really necessary. It may be scary, but it's necessary to put a judge on notice that you're not gonna stand for that you are a competent attorney. You don't need to be belittled or, be threatened when you challenge authority. That's what your job is as an attorney. So I think more of us are doing that. But another thing that we're doing, just me and my colleagues, we've noticed that some of the men don't step up when it happens. So it's kind of like, hey, when the judge noticed you and didn't notice her when she was waiting for her case to be called, when that happens, tell the judge, hey, I think so-and-so was here first, or things of that sort. So we're kind of tackling it in several ways, but we're definitely challenging more and more.
One thing that some folks in my generation are doing, who are now in the position of doing diversity training for judges. I was doing a presentation here with someone from Golden Gate who runs these judicial programs. And she said that one of the exercises that she gave to the judges, usually they have some little break exercise that's fun, and the judges go have coffee and whatever. She gave them an exercise to go to one of the low-income districts in San Francisco and try to get from there on a bus to the courthouse in a given period of time. And what they learned, because you have to transfer, the buses are late, there is traffic, how easy it would be to be in your client's situation and to have to do that for an unnecessary reason. So she said, I said, do you think this was effective? And she said, I think there were a lot of judges who just didn't want to go to that part of town and didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But she said getting them to even do the mental exercise of imagining how that might affect a litigant was probably a useful addition to diversity training. Sideline, I imagine, Anissa, that part of what might have been going on in that exchange that you had with the judge had to do with not just gender, but race, and probably age thrown in there for the obvious reason. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how that, triple bond affects women of color, and then maybe Lara and Wynn could talk about what they've observed with their colleagues or in the courtroom when they're practicing with women of color.
So I've actually thought about that issue a lot, and for me, I think I ask myself, what do I identify with more? Being a black woman, being black, or being a woman? And to be honest with you, I think I identify more with my race than my gender. And I think that what I've experienced in terms of, just being looked over when you're in the courtroom, or people assuming that you don't know what you're talking about, things of that sort, that goes along with it, I think it made me really stronger. I think that it helped me be more fearless even when I'm handling cases. Like, you have that strength. I feel that that's how it's impacted me. I definitely, sometimes, I don't know, is it because I'm a woman you're treating me this, or is it because of the color of my skin? You just don't know sometimes, but something is wrong. You know that you're being treated differently because of the way you look. That is the icky feeling that you feel in your stomach as soon as you sense that. It's very real. But for me, I think it's just, I identify more with being an African American, and sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate why I'm being treated one way or another. I think it just made me stronger, and I do watch a lot of very powerful women of color. Sometimes, like, I just YouTube speeches. I think one thing that I told Lara when we were talking about the incident was, I remember around this time Maxine Waters was being made fun of by the president, and she said, I'm a strong black woman. I can never be undermined, nor can I be intimidated. And I was like, well, that's what I'm going to say from now on. I was like, that was her response to the president making fun of her hair. Is I can't be intimidated, nor can I be undermined. And I think that empowers me. I watch that clip more, you know, when I'm feeling like I need to be empowered. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
And just to say two small points on Anissa's story about this conflict with the judge that I feel like are important, just to get to your point, Deborah, about kind of the race, gender dynamics, and also gender bias issues. Because when we talked about this, at least, it seemed like, to set the stage, it was a very packed courtroom on a Friday. The judge is the presiding judge in the department. He's like a 58 or 59-year-old white guy who gets very red in the face and gets very temperamental. And so in this situation, he was extremely worked up. And if I interviewed people who were in the courtroom that day, not just Anissa, and what they said to a person was that he was leaning over and screaming, and his face was bright red. And he was basically implying that Anissa was going to go to jail, and the climax of the back and forth was that she finally said, you know, if your honor is intimidating me and going to send me to jail, then I would just invoke my rights and ask for a lawyer. So it got very, very, very far along in the exchange. And I think many of your colleagues did think that you were going to jail. And Anissa, as she said, was sort of channeling Maxine Waters. But I think the other thing that you told me, and I feel like it's such a poignant part of the story, is that you had to stand up for yourself, not be degraded in front of your client and your colleagues and the prosecutor, this whole courtroom. But you also had to do it in a way that you told me, like, you didn't want to come off like, quote, the angry black woman. And so she spoke in this very composed, very calm way. And it's just the piling on of the unfairness, just the outrageous way that she was treated. You knew she was a lawyer. She'd been there numerous times. This was just a power play. The racial dynamics, the screaming that he was allowed to act so badly, but that you had to walk this tightrope in pushing back, just to me magnifies both kind of like the stakes and sort of what women have to go through to push back and get respect, and then the outsized consequences. So I just wanted to kind of make those additional points about it. It's very dramatic, and the transcript, it even like leaps off the page when you read it.
You know what's interesting about that is when I was junior, I was calmer and more controlled when I pushed back. Now I'm not. So I just did a trial in federal court about 2 weeks ago. Judge Mendez, very, very strong, powerful, cranky judge. Very bright guy, but very difficult judge. And my team, as usual, was a team of all women, and these were women who had not been to trial with me before and had not tried cases. And I have a set of trial rules that always surprises people, because the first one is, we are calm and cheerful. I do not yell, you do not yell, we do not lose our tempers with each other. There will be a time in which you want to be screaming at somebody. Might be the paralegal who came to court without the exhibits, might be me, but we're not going to do it. We are calm and we are cheerful. And so in the midst of the trial, the judge got very angry with me over something I thought was unfair. And what the team said to me later is that the biggest shock of that trial was the person who kept telling them we are calm and we are cheerful stood up, raised her voice, and said, "This is just unfair. I totally disagree with you." And that he came back and said, "Well, I know you do. I understand that you do, and I respect the disagreement." And I said, "Well, I don't think you do. And I'd like to take you back through what led up to this." And, you know, frankly, I was afraid he was about to sanction us for something that I did think was unfair. We had produced what we needed to produce. We hadn't produced one small piece that wasn't asked for, and his view was, you turn over what's asked for and you turn over everything else, and I still disagree. What was interesting to me afterwards is that the team, particularly the junior women, said it was such a learning moment for them of how when you are typically at this level and you stand up and you escalate, then that can work for you. And the thing is, you have to learn this stuff. I mean, watching Maxine is a fabulous idea because she's a role model for everyone, and she gets attacked by everyone, and she is still above the fray. And so that's great, but you have to find your way. And that's sometimes going to be calm and cheerful, and at a more junior level, I think it's great because you don't really know yet how to yell at people. That takes a long, don't you think? That takes a while to figure it out and not go to jail.
Yes.
But you know, I think it's such a contextual judgment. When I did the report on the legal profession that Lara mentioned in 2001, I talked about this double bind and double standard confronting women attorneys, and the double bind comes from needing to be perceived as too feminine or not feminine enough, too soft or too aggressive. And the double standard is that what's assertive in a man is abrasive in a woman. And you know, I always show that great New Yorker cartoon where the queen looks at the king and says, but when a woman has his head cut off, she's a bitch. So, you know, the phrase that I always use in negotiating this, which comes out of some research, is women need to be relentlessly pleasant. It's the, you know, a variation on what you just said. And, you know, when I told Cheryl Sandberg, when she was writing Lean In about that research, and she called me back and she said, can you give me the footnote for that? I want to track that down a little bit more. And you know, that's what worked for her. I realized that there are times when you probably do want to escalate, because
We have to sometimes.
right, yeah, you know, as the cliche goes, you know, history is not made by well-behaved women, Maxine Waters. But there are an awful lot of badly behaved women who get burned at the stake, and we've all seen that. And you know, Michelle Obama talks about it in her autobiography of once where she kind of really pushed back. It was taken out of context, and there was that horrible New Yorker cover of her with, you know, doing the fist bump. So she, you know, she learned that in her role, she had to err on the side of when they go low, we go high. So I do think it's a contextual judgment, and I also do think that women of color, especially black women who are fighting against that angry black women stereotype, have to sort of think about it in a way that's maybe more complicated than you have to think about it.
I you know, I'm not a black woman. I don't know. I work with black women, and my impression is that it's almost as important, the age. That you, at a junior level, get even less respect. And so that's a dynamic that's very much to play that, you know, a Maxine and a Michelle and other folks don't have. So it's almost a triple whammy, I think, because the junior part is the hard part.
Yeah, I'm a three-striker.
Yeah. You're not out.
I'm in this for life. That's fine. I agree. I think that when I care a lot about my clients, and if it was just me, I think I would be even more vocal, but sometimes I am terrified that the judge is going to take it out on my client. And so then you have this, well, it's not fair, I should not be forced to be somewhat submissive or something like that. I should not be forced to do that. That's not who I am. I'm a strong woman, but my client does not need this. And so that's a battle that I still have. But I think that when I choose to, be more, aggressive and things like that, I tell myself, choose your battles, okay? We can be aggressive sometimes. When the whole room sees the reason, then I think I feel more comfortable being, I can shout and be more aggressive and be more assertive. Because I'm thinking, well, everyone's seeing it, they're not going to think that I'm just being completely irrational. So that may translate to, when I'm in trial and the judge is kind of saying things, in the bench, it trickles into the courtroom. I got to make sure that everyone sees the craziness, and then I will, lash out and be assertive and things of that sort. But it's always a battle, it's a balancing test. A lot of thought that goes into it because you just don't want to harm your clients.
I just say I'm never submissive. I walk into the courtroom and one of my partners told me it's like the dog that walks in and pees all over to show his courtroom and he's in charge, and that is what I do. I walk in and my view is this is my stage, not yours. Very nice to meet you, but this is my stage, this is my jury, and this is the guy who's gonna get me to the jury. And it takes a little bit of confidence to get you there. You just have to pretend it, don't you think, for the first few years? But when you get there, it is the best feeling in the world because it's my courtroom, not your courtroom, and you're gonna make mistakes in here that I'm not gonna make. And that's just my view of the proceedings, and that's what sort of takes me through the day.
Yeah, well, I also think, it's what historical moment we're in. I worked for Thurgood Marshall, and he had these stories of litigating in the South for the NAACP and bumping up the most virulent racism. And he said, I could either defend the client or I could call,
Right.
everybody and his brother on it. And he had to make the choice. I'm here for the NAACP. I want to win this case. There'll be time later to call the judge, and I think one of the important things that we've now done is created the complaint channel so that you don't always have to do it as you did on the spot. You can complain later, and now we've got anonymous complaint channels to sort of remove the possibility of retaliating against the client, because that's always, I think, a risk for litigators. All right, one last question, then we're going to throw it open to all of you because I know a lot of people here have questions. But, it's kind of the elephant in the room. Me too. How has that affected the practice? And, has it affected appearance? Has it affected backlash? Has it affected men's willingness to mentor women litigators? Can you just say a little bit about how you think that movement is playing out?
Well, I think it has had some benefits, but it's also had some drawbacks. And so I think the most concrete example is that I was invited to give a talk about this piece to this group. They're called the Inner Circle, and it's this invitation-only group of the top 100 civil litigators, mostly I think med mal, and 90 of them are men, and only 10 of them are women. And one of the women that I started the piece with, Elizabeth Baea, is in this Inner Circle, and she invited me to speak. And I saw the email chain between her and the person who runs the conference, and they were basically like, we don't need to hear from this woman, like, we don't need any of this. And so she had to sort of push to even get me there. And then when I was there, they were sort of all trapped in that room with me, all these men, which, I'm very happy to see some men here. Again, they're in the minority, and they normally are with this kind of a topic. And they were pretty angry and defensive a lot about Me Too, and a lot of the questions that I got were about how they felt like they had to pull back from giving women in their firms opportunities. They didn't want to go on trips with them, out of state cases to take depositions, if they had to be alone with them in a hotel, work late, because they might be falsely accused. And then one of them got quite angry with me and basically said, you're telling us all that we just have to be aware all the time. And I said, well, what do you think it's like for us? We're aware all the time. Maybe you should think about waking up a little bit, and while you're waking up, maybe you should think about the fact that if you keep your hands to yourself and keep your gross thoughts to yourself, you probably won't get accused of anything. It's not that hard to stay on the right side of the law.
Laura gives notice.
But that's just an example of, you're talking about people who make millions and millions of dollars, and they have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, and they feel under attack, and their first impulse is to pull back opportunities.
It's a real problem. And what a lot of people said to me after the Ellen Powell trial is, if John Doerr can get sued for gender discrimination, and we all know he's leading the industry in his efforts to bring in women partners and to increase diversity, then I could, and that is going to impact the hiring of women. And so those of us who are in leadership positions just have to keep saying that is not okay. In my firm, I spoke to senior leaders about a year ago, and I said, none of this, I won't go to dinner with women associates now. If you go to dinner with men associates, you go to dinner with women. And if you're really that freaked out because you're paranoid that you're going to say something stupid, bring both. So that is a problem. But what I want to say about the appearance question you asked, and Laura's heard me rail about this, and you probably see me write about this. What shocked me when I tried the Ellen Powell case, which if you don't know what it was a gender case in the venture industry. Tried it in January of 2015 in San Francisco's Pier Court for 6 weeks. 50 reporters in the courtroom every day, New York Times in the front row, Wall Street Journal. Every day, blog, write, pictures, craziness. And what shocked me was the focus on my appearance. And if you haven't already figured it out, I basically am the mom in appearance. I have mom hair, I wear, every day in trial I wear the same thing, I wear black slacks, I wear short black boots, I wear a bright colored shirt, and I wear a bright colored jacket. It's just my trial uniform. run down the hall in it. It's easy if you spill on it, which I frequently do. It's not gonna show. There was a terrible moment at the POW trial where I nicked my finger and I went like this and I was covered in blood. And I was wearing a light jacket. It was like the only time. But that's my uniform. And what shocked me was the fixation with it. And most of it was the feminist press. That every day would start with Hermley in a Monet-inspired teal jacket. Yes! You haven't seen the writings on this? Oh, it was unbelievable. And this was the tech media. It was all women. And then Hermley gives her opening statement in a leopard print blouse. It's like, it's a business jacket with spies. I mean, it made me sound like a streetwalker. And the stuff about my hair just shocked me. I mean, who has more boring hair than I do? And every day it was a discussion of her helmet of hair. And I really was not prepared for that. I mean, that is ridiculous, people. I mean, nothing about my opponent, nothing about my female co-counsel either. And what I concluded was, just because I'm so pushy and so out there and so this is my courtroom, I'm standing up and you're all looking at me, that just sort of led to it. Laura's heard me tell this story, but I realized I was taking myself too seriously one day when I looked in the back, because my husband usually showed up mid-afternoon just as a show of support. And I looked and I saw this really familiar looking man. I couldn't place him. I figured, oh, he's a reporter. And he goes like this. And I went, oh, God. And I went, and I turned around and I realized it's my hairdresser. He has come as a show of support. And he told me later, it looks so good from the back. I could tell you blew dry. I'm like, no, I didn't. And then I really realized, oh my God, I'm taking this way too seriously. But it's hard not to. It's so annoying.
Yeah, well, you know, we could spend a lot of time on micro indignities, but your story just reminded me. When I was president of the Association of American Law Schools, I was sort of on a road trip going to meet with fancy people, and on the first day of the trip, a guy seated to my left who shall remain nameless, although he does not deserve to, but prominent person, spilled red wine on my beige suit. And I was just like, oh, sorry. And just went on. And I'm like, I have to wear this thing for 3 days. I have a different change of blouse, but I don't have another suit. I ran to the ladies' room with clutching a salt shaker.
Oh, now you'd have a Clorox pen. I would be there with you with my
Well,
took the blood off.
and I did not have time to go buy another suit. Of course, it didn't come out. And from then on, I traveled in navy blue and black.
Yes.
Or indestructible.
Bright
in a nice
colors.
bright
Yes.
shirt.
Yes.
But, you know, and if I'm next to somebody like that, I'm kind of like this with the jacket. So, little word to all of you women, aspiring people, do not sit next to the person. You know, and he said nothing when I came back from the ladies' room
Dick?
with this robe. Dick. You know, it's like, you know, he could have gone out and gotten a shirt or a tie. And it just didn't occur to him that this, you know, was a problem he had created for someone. All right, on that uplifting note, progress yet to be made in our profession, let's throw it open to questions.
I have a question on the appearance piece. And I work for a big law firm. I do clients work. My clients never go to trial. They never want to go to trial. It's too much risk. I do a lot of work for insurance companies. And so the rare time when a jury trial is coming up, I'm embarrassed to say, my first thought is, oh my goodness, what am I going to wear to trial? And I hate that because I don't think the men that I work with, and you tried a case last year, I don't think the men I work with panic over that. And I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts on what does the jury really, how do juries view women's appearance? Do they really focus on it as much as I think they do?
They're obsessed with the way women look.
They are.
Absolutely
They are
obsessed.
obsessed.
They're staring at you all day long. They notice your jewelry. They notice if you're wearing makeup. They notice if you have a wedding
Shoes.
ring, what your shoes look like, if they're nice, who made them, if you're wearing a skirt. If they notice everything. And I guess, I mean, I'm really interested to know what Anissa and Lynn think because I think their jury trial experience is much more recent than mine. But when I was trying most of my jury cases, it was like between 2001 and 2008, and it was in federal court, so very icy and formal. And we, you know, there was just an unwritten rule in my office. You wore a skirt suit, you wore heels, you wore stockings. You did not deviate from that. And there was just an unwritten sort of expectation that that's what we wore. And so I did. But I'm curious to know what you think.
Yes, it definitely matters, and jurors definitely pay attention to it. Usually after a trial, I usually go talk to the jury just to get an idea of like, okay, what did you find compelling? You know, things of that sort. But they always, it never fails, they always make a comment about my attire. It could be my hair, because I switched the style. In the middle of trial, they're like, is this a new girl? We don't know. You know, it's like, and I don't want to do. So it's like, I try not to be, I definitely pay attention to my attire and make sure that I'm well put together, that I'm sharp, and so that they don't focus on that. I'm like, focus on the trial and the facts of this case, so I definitely pay attention to that. I'm actually in trial, and I decided to wear this, and I thought, this would be good when I'm crossing a cop, because it doesn't look like, you know, I'm being the man in the room or something like that. But I thought, you know what, I think the jury might like this, because I'm going to go hard on the cop, and the outfit may, you know, level that out. So you think about the stuff, and I was planning to wear all white tomorrow, but never mind. I'm terrified now. But yes, you definitely.
For the women in Congress.
I know, what's these supposed to
No, you're not. If you nick your finger. So
Never white.
I wear, like I said, I wear the same thing every day in trial. Black pants. I've got something like 7 pairs of the same. This one that fits me well, and 7 pairs of those. I have the silk shirt. I have the bright jacket, and they really do comment. They really do look. But that's what I'm comfortable in. I'm strong in that. I have an FU attitude in that. I remember in 1995, I tried a very contentious case, and it was about the time I started to be lead counsel. I guess I'd been 1 or 2 before that. And I was in a skirt with pantyhose, and I had to crawl in front of the jury under the table to help to plug something in, and I never wore a skirt after that. It was the worst moment of trying to figure out how, and of course everybody was like this. And I will never do it. I don't know how women wear dresses in trial. I mean, my hat's off, but I can't do it. I just could not do it. The only modifications I make to my appearance are, I don't wear jewelry that I think a jury would think is a powerful, a rich person jewelry. So that said, I wore a bird brooch that was a family piece from my grandmother, a gold brooch. And even that, somebody started to write that it was the mockingbird. And then one of my associates, Megan Lawson, when she would see the media watching, and then they started to post it, but that is the one thing I don't do. I don't wear like a flashy piece of jewelry so somebody says, oh, there's that rich lawyer pressing me boy, which is, you know, how I start off anyway. I mean, I start off with a jury way behind. I do. It's a jury of employees. It's a jury of people who believe in this area. She was discriminated against. Female welder alleging group of men, sexual harassment. How many people think she was harassed? Right? You all do, right? So I start off behind, and I don't want to get further behind. But other than that, that's what I wear.
I sometimes show my class, there's a hilarious clip from the O.J. Simpson trial where Marcia Clark is being grilled on her lapel pins. You know, Hillary Clinton made the black traveling pantsuits safe for everyone. That's the fallback position, I think, because you just kind of want to remove that issue from people's focus. But it doesn't, you know, even after she did that, people were still, you know, constantly on her about her hair. And she showed cleavage once in the Senate, and oh my God, the Washington Post practically ran a front page article on it.
People are not intelligent. I mean, at some point you have to recognize that.
Well, they're interested. They're not necessarily in everything you'd like them to be interested in, right? More questions? Oh, come on. Thank you.
So, I mean, obviously I'm one of the few men in the room. I just want to ask, like, if there are, like, comments for, like, how you can actually be, like, a good man, and make sure that you like what to keep in mind to stand like when to stand up for women versus when to stand back, and like that sort of thing when it comes to litigation or even just in firm life or anywhere else.
Good job. Good question. Do I start?
Well, like I said earlier, what me and my colleagues do is tell our, male colleagues, can you say that, say something when you notice it? Because if it's just us battling it, I think the men notice it and say something. I think that's very helpful. Be a good man.
I feel like it's sort of a complicated question, so it's hard to know. I mean, I think, so for example, one of the first cases I tried, I was 27, and the male attorney was just awful to me. I mean, he just sort of would like bully me and gaslight me and file motions in front of the judge saying that I was like committing all kinds of misconduct, and then would call me and tell me that, I could say goodbye to my bar card. And I was really young. It was my first trial that I was trying by myself, and I had as a second chair this very much like a 14 years older kind of alpha male type. And so I would, tell him what was going on, and we would go to court. And I didn't really know how I was going to deal with it, because I was struggling with all the things that we've been talking about. And so my male supervisor's response was, the next time we went to court, was to march up to this guy and be like, after this, you don't talk to her, you don't look at her, you don't even speak to her unless I'm in the room. You're not to call her, you're not to say anything to her unless I'm present. As far as I'm concerned, like, you will never speak to her again when she's alone. And I remember like feeling this sort of combination of like relief, but then also just feeling like sort of really degraded, like he was like my dad, right? And then it just sort of reinforced that I was kind of like the weak one that needed to be protected. And then thereafter, all of our communication filtered through him. So it then became this like very cumbersome way of communicating where we could no longer directly communicate at all. And I think he came from a really good place of just being like, I've had enough of this, I'm protecting my supervisee, and as far as I'm concerned, like this just needs to end. And he ended it, but like in a way that didn't exactly make me look like I had a whole lot of power or agency or autonomy.
There was a cost to that.
Yeah.
I think, I'll give you an example of what someone once did for me. I was in federal court, I think it was in Fresno, Judge Weiner, and he screamed at me. As I walked through the little swinging door to make my appearance, he started screaming that it was the stupidest removal he'd ever seen, and he screamed and he screamed and he screamed, and he continued to scream until he said, and that's it. And then I said, thank you, Your Honor, and I turned around, and my opponent actually, I don't know if he'd do this now in this era, but he sort of took my elbow and said, let me buy you a cup of coffee. And he kind of laughed, but I was very grateful for that. And I learned something from it, which is, it's more complicated these days, but even having him walk next to me out of the courtroom felt like a sign of solidarity. And since I was there by myself, I was kind of new as an new associate at Orrick, I'd been in-house. That was great. And so what I've learned is if I'm in court and I think my opponent's getting screwed, which sometimes happens, sometimes I'm the kid who gets all the good favors, in fact, a lot. And then sometimes I think the judge isn't fair. I make a physical move. You can't always do it. In federal court you can't, because you're over here at this table and they're 20 feet away at that table. But I have on occasion moved over to be closer to my opponent and just kind of stood there with them. And that, I think, is something you can always do when somebody's being bullied. You can't let the bullies of the world bully people without you making some kind of effort to help. This is what I taught my son, and this is, if you teach your kids that, you have to live it yourself. And so you have to try and find a way, I think, to speak up or support somebody.
The other thing, I often show an old punch cartoon, and it's a picture of a boardroom with one woman and a room full of men, and the chair leans out and says, oh, that's a great point, Ms. T. Now let's just wait till one of the men makes it. And I love the cartoon because it works on two levels. It both describes what women frequently experience, which is their good points get reattributed to a man, but also the fact that when a man does speak, if it's a white man on issues of race or gender, it's heard differently by other white men because it's not special pleading, it's not whining, it's coming from someone like them who is pointing out, you know, there are no women in this room, there's nobody on this panel. I'm married to a guy like this who spends a lot of time, he's a public interest environmental lawyer, and he heads a program. And he does a really great job of mentoring subordinates to make sure that they get opportunities, that they get credit, that they're in the limelight, that somebody wants him to come do it. He'll say, you know, Emily is really more up on this than I am. He passes on opportunities, and he passes on credit, and he passes on the spotlight situation. And he is loved and revered for that, because there are not a lot of people that want to give up recognition, especially in the public interest space, because that's the currency of the realm. You don't get paid much, but recognition is all. So when someone does that and does it for a woman or a person of color, or makes the point that they're not included in a place where they should, it's really, really powerful. And you know, I think it's not something that you'll get dinged for, and it's something that you will really earn you respect and affection among all the people who benefit from it.
I wanted to just say one thing about, it's kind of related to the question, although it's coming at it from a woman's perspective, kind of what can women who have achieved, well, okay, fine. Lynn is like the LeBron James of attorneys, but like, you know, something.
Someone just call me the Darth Vader of attorneys.
But I've been thinking a lot about this. Sort of, what happens when, as a woman, you scrabble and you achieve some small or large amount of power and stature? What can you do with it to help other people? And what I've experienced both ends of this. I've experienced having women in positions of authority where they feel like there's a woman's seat at the table and it's my seat. There's one seat and I'm sitting.
I just don't, does that really
Well,
happen?
Yes, sorry, it does.
Okay, all right. But you know, and they come to this idea of raising women up from a place of scarcity. And then I see on the other side, you know, women, and this is why you're so confounded by this, who use what they have to help other women. Lynn has referred to the fact that, you know, she's often in trial with all women. I think 11 out of the 14 of the women in your practice, something like that, are women, right? And that's not an accident. She's looking for hungry, ambitious, talented women and raising them up. So, but I guess I feel like that's another really, really important part of this, that I think that we as women can't think like, oh, you know, you're gonna replace me. And so I need to jealously guard the tiny piece of territory that society has allowed me to occupy as the one woman or the one black woman or the one woman under the age of 30 or whatever it is. And you have to think about it as, I'm just going to create more seats. I'm going to create a bigger table. And that, I think, is also something that's important to push forward.
Even if you are that stupid shrew of a person, I mean, I haven't met a lot of those people. But again, as I've said, I may just be horribly insensitive. What is great is that the legal profession has changed so much in the last 5 years. And by that I don't mean judges and juries, but our clients constantly say, we expect the team that's pitching this to be 50% diverse, 80% diverse, led by diverse partners, and we expect to see that. And to practice, at least here, if you go to Alabama, God help you. But if you're going to practice here, I don't know what it's like there, but I suspect it's not good. But if you are going to practice here, what you're going to find is that if you are pitching Apple, if you are pitching SpaceX, if you're representing Microsoft like I do, there is an extraordinary insistence that's fairly new, maybe 5-10 years. We will not hire you without that. And so, you know, there will be a little backlash eventually. I mean, occasionally I hear from my male partners, I would really have liked to have been a part of that team. Well, I'm sorry, that team is gotta be diverse as the client requests. And it's just sort of, you're stuck with what you're stuck with at the time they're stuck with it. But for purposes of women, and particularly women of color, this is a better time than it's ever been to really have extraordinary opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yes.
So I think this is mostly guided towards Anissa because she's a younger attorney. but all of you feel free to chime in. I'm wondering whether you have some kind of guidepost or line or, you know, general mantra about when to pick your battles. I think that a lot of the things I encounter are very subtle, and sometimes I can't tell whether it's because I'm a woman or because I'm a young attorney and I don't have that respect of age yet that you get. And a lot of the times I have to decide whether it's worth saying something and whether it's not. And usually I err on the side of it's not worth saying something because, you know, you end up making a bigger deal of it than maybe it was. So I'm wondering whether you have, you know, like if it makes me feel really terrible, then I'll say something, or I always err on the side of my client. You know, any thoughts?
So yes, I think it's a case-by-case situation, unfortunately. But usually I do like to step up and say something. Times where I've been more reserved is like, you know, I'm in trial and this judge is going to sentence my client or something like that. Or it's also like, okay, how much has this judge been acting this way or this person's been acting this way? But I think that when it comes to my client, I'm still trying to figure it out, and I'm still trying to, you know, figure out how to pick my battles. But usually, you know, when I'm doing motions or things like that, like the situation that I explained, the story I told earlier, that was a situation where I was even scared for my client. But like I explained to Lara before, it was like I'm representing myself and I'm representing my client. I hope we both don't get hurt, kind of thing. But it was so crazy that I was just not going to let it go. That was a battle I was willing to fight that day, and I had to make sure that I pay attention to the record and, you know, also protect my client. In fact, my client thought it was all about him for a second. And so we stepped out, and he's like, "Oh my God, am I going to jail? What's going on?" So, but it was, you know, I was getting the heat. But err on the side of I want to fight this battle, but again, you have to think about your clients. It's hard. Still trying to figure it out.
I think I probably erred on the side of not when it was a close call, at least for the first 10 years. At some point, honor demands, you know, in some situations, honor demands that you stand up and speak up. You don't want to put your client ever in jeopardy because that's our job. But other than that, but you know, truthfully, the world is full of a lot of stupid people. And if you're not going to see the person again and you have a call to make, I don't know. But I do agree it's case by case. You know, sometimes you just need to say, that's just a load of crap. I mean, that's just what you're saying is stupid. But it is case by case, I think. I don't typically say that to a federal judge.
I've done this recently for the first time, but you know, one thing that we haven't talked about today is the bias that can come from clients, and particularly clients that don't choose you, which are basically every client that I've ever had. Because when you're a public defender, you're free, and you get to decide. And a lot of my clients, especially in the beginning, were like, "Oh my God, I knew that it was going to be bad, but I didn't know I was getting you." I mean, they really thought they were going to get kind of an older white man. And so, you know, I mean, Lynn was talking about how in an employment discrimination context, you're starting out from behind. And I think when you're representing someone who's been accused of a crime,
Right.
the presumption of innocence, you can talk about that all day long. People are looking at your client and asking themselves, "I wonder what he did," right? So you're starting out behind. And then you're also starting out behind sometimes with the client feeling like, everything I've gotten for free in my life sucks, so you probably suck too, especially because you don't look the way that I think you're supposed to. And recently in the clinic, because I run a clinic at USF, we get cases. We get cases actually from Anissa's office, and I got some real pushback from a client, and I don't know if it was because of our age difference, because I'm 20 years older than him, but I just sort of lost it. I felt like he was being disrespectful because I was a woman, and I talked to him almost like I would talk to just like an unruly teenager, and I was like, "Do not speak to me that way. You will not talk to me that way. You will not address me that way. I don't want to hear that tone of voice. I don't want you." And I just sort of like unloaded on him, and I'd never done it before. And he was really taken aback, sort of like abashed, and apologized. And it was a weird moment for me. I had never done that because I think I'd always sought to sort of assuage my clients' concerns by saying, like, "I understand that you feel that way. Now you're going to see me go into court and fight like hell." But he was still misbehaving, and I was like, "No." And, you know, I think that's maybe something about getting older, too.
I don't, that's not something, I mean, I have to do that with opposing counsel, but I don't have to do it with my clients, because they pay a crap load for the privilege. Feel free to come to talk down to me. I mean, I have no need to represent you. There aren't that many of us who are actively trying cases and winning them in my field, but good luck trying to go on to the next person. Then I'll call my friends and say, by the way, this person was a huge butthead, and we'll put the word out. So this has happened. Opposing counsel, yes. Don't talk to me that way. I don't know who you think you're talking to. Don't talk to me that way.
Well, I definitely deal with that a lot. And I definitely put some of my clients in their place.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you know, one thing I can promise you is that I'm gonna fight for you. You don't want this, we can get another male. You know, we can get a male attorney to represent you, but I'm not gonna put up with that. And just hang up whatever you need to do, but you kind of have to nip it in the butt, if that makes sense. So yeah, just fight back and let them know that, you know, you're not gonna be disrespected.
So I have a question that's, I think is very specific to the female experience and certain decisions that we make personally. So, starting with family, right? So if you are working with clients and you happen to perhaps be pregnant, how might that impact your relationship with them, or does it? And what do you do in that situation? Because you're trying to create a family for yourself and decisions you're making, but at the same time you're trying to gain or have respect from certain people who might be dismissive of you.
So when I was up for partner at Oric when I became pregnant, and that's sort of an Oric tradition. I mean, we have so many women partners who got pregnant as they were coming up for the partnership. Don't ask me why, it just kind of happens. Maybe you're excited, maybe you're not careful. So it's just a whole group of us. And the funny thing was, I was, you know, I'm not a small girl anyway, and I was quite large. And after I gave birth, the chairman of Oric, who was then the chairman of the employment group, said, okay, you need to go see this client in the Midwest, but do you really have to bring that breast pump with you? And in those days, you know, breast pumps were they were like big blue things, and it was so obvious what it was. He was like, these are very conservative people. They're in the Midwest, you know, there's a religious aspect to this. Do you really need to bring the breast pump? And if you do, can you act like it's a suitcase? And I'm like, dude, you are, I mean, I don't think I was saying dude in those days, but it's like, this is the stupidest thing. And I showed up at the client, and the general counsel opened the door, and he goes, oh, a breast pump, do you need a private place? Let me find you, we've got a lactation room. And I mean, it is difficult. This job is difficult.
Yep.
And I don't know if you were trying cases pregnant, I was.
Yes.
And, you know, I had a very tough pregnancy because I was old. I mean, I was sick every day for 9 months. I was in federal court throwing up in federal judges' waste cans, just frantically trying to be out of sight of the jury. I just had a very difficult time. So I think it's tough, but I mean, thank God I did it. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to give up the experience. You have to make your own path, but the job is hard, the pregnancy is hard, the breast pump is hard, it's all hard.
And I think it's hard too. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and not necessarily from the perspective of trying cases while pregnant, but of this general idea, which is just making me more and more pissed off, that women are expected to achieve something called the mythical work-life balance, where somehow magically we're always at work when we need to be, and then we're always at our child's dance recital, talent show, soccer game, all 5 senses attuned and present in the moment.
And looking good.
And looking fabulous. And it makes me livid because, for 2 reasons. One, it's completely unrealistic, and it's this way to set women up for a constant sort of spiral of shame and guilt and anxiety. And 2, because of course we don't apply that metric to men. And then I've been thinking about it sort of in terms of my own life. I'm a single parent, I have 2 kids. And you know, my feeling is at various parts along the way, I have chosen my clients. I have made a choice that I am going to spend time with my clients and not spend time with my kids. I tried a case in LA when my kids were 4 and 2. We live in San Francisco. The month before, I moved down there, rented a house that I called the plastic house because it was like a 1-bedroom apartment. Everything was plastic, right next to the courthouse. Didn't see my kids for days on end. I mean, I was completely committed to getting my client out of prison. He'd been down for 34 years. He was innocent, and I felt like if I had to not see my kids for a couple of weeks to make that happen, I was gonna make that decision. And that isn't work-life balance, that's just a choice that I made because I wanted to be down for my client. And over again, when confronted with those choices, I have chosen my client. And the way that I think about it when I talk to my kids is, I don't see my work and my life as being separated in this really sort of binary way. What my kids really understood about that case, even though they were young, dragged on forever, was that I was so committed to this, and this was really like an existential question, like, was he gonna die in prison or not? And they got it, and we have a relationship with him and his mom, we see each other all the time, so it's an unusual case in that respect, kind of like this blending, but what they understand is that this is my job, this is what I'm committed to doing, these are the people that I'm fighting for, and this is part of what makes me happy, and also what allows me to support them. Like, I pay the mortgage, I pay their bills, I'm the reason why they get to have the things that they have. And so I feel like, you know, they get that message, although I always wonder. And then just to finish up this story, I still have the shame spiral because I'm never on the field trip, I'm never chaperoning. I missed my daughter's 7th birthday to go try a case. You know, her dad was like, change the trial date, and I was like, absolutely not, they're not ready, this is my chance to win, like, I'm not changing this date, no. And I always wondered, what am I doing to them? So my son had this like Thanksgiving potluck. I don't know why they thought that we could all stay home and make things from scratch, but everybody did.
Is it a Catholic school?
No, it's a public school. And it was open to all parents, but almost everybody there was a mom, and they all handmade stuff or whatever you do at home to cook, which I don't really know what that is. And I was coming from court, and I ran to Whole Foods at the last minute, like bought a lemon poppy seed loaf, which is not very Thanksgiving-y, plopped it down the table. My son saw me and sort of like cringed on the carpet. And then the exercise with it, they each had an orange leaf that was like cut out of construction paper, and they had to stand up and say what they were thankful for about their parents, and they got these prompts. I appreciate my parents because this helps me too. And he was one of the last kids to go, this is 3rd grade, and all the kids start getting up and talking about how, you know, they appreciate their moms because their moms cook them really good meals, and they appreciate their moms because their mom, you know, cheers at the soccer field, and all I'm thinking about is like every meal that I've never cooked, every soccer game that, you know, I'm just thinking, what is my son gonna say about me? And so he stood up and he said, and I know because the leaf is on my wall, he said, I appreciate my mother because she is a lawyer who gets people out of jail. This helps me reflect, have good values, and be a better person. Sincerely, Carter Lyon Dirks. And I was like, yes!
You know, I so hate to spoil the story, but I'm having a flashback to being on a panel like this, and a woman who had taken time out from the labor force said that when she did it was when her son looked at her once and said, when I grow up, I want to be a client.
It's so hard. It's really hard.
It is.
And if you don't have, I mean, I'm married for what I got. I mean, when I met my husband, I'm like, oh, that's the guy who'll be a good supportive father. And that was a huge part of how hot he was to me. And he still is, and he has been, but it's still really hard. I mean, my son didn't want a lot for me, but what he wanted was me at his basketball games, which was great in high school when they were at 7 o'clock, but in 5th grade when they were at 3:30. I mean, I was there, I was acting like I was watching with, I think we had Blackberries then, and I was just basically working. I was fake mom in the stand. I was lawyer in the stand working, fake mom, yes, go back Collins, go! But, I mean, it is not an easy process.
Yeah, but we should end on an uplifting story. So Martha Barnett, who was the 2nd woman president of the American Bar Association, really prominent woman lawyer, tells about how when she was starting off and she was pregnant and she took a pro bono case and the client was like on death row and you know, she went in to meet him for the first time and she's pregnant and he looks at her and she's white, he's African American, and he goes, they sent me a woman who's pregnant. God, I'm fucked. And she said, you know, at that point, her priority in life was to get this guy out, and, which she did. And so, you know, we all are grateful for the legacy that the people who went first like that have left, and it's a lot easier for you than certainly it was to a lot of my colleagues and everyone else on this panel. And my hope is that you all have been here, you've heard the stories, you're going to make it so much better for the next generation who comes forward. So join me in thanking.